Hey guys, this is Nanavati, and I'm here to tell you about the best units for Dark Eldar. Dark Eldar is a really interesting army because they're broken down into 3 sub-factions, which is really unique to them as opposed to every other army in 40k. Dark Eldar can be an army of Cav-Lights, which are like your warriors and most of your vehicles, your basic infantry. They can be broken down into Witches, which is your assault portion with a lot of cool combat tricks, naked ladies running at you, and the Covens, which are your mutated flesh warp creatures. So all 3 of these can be combined to make one cohesive army, and all 3 have different competitive values and aspects. So I'm going to break down which units for each one are most competitive and how to run them. For Cabals, mostly you're going to want to look at your vehicles as your main source of firepower for list and their awesome transport capabilities. The main Cabal you're going to want to look at is Cabal of the Blackheart because it unlocks a stratagem called Agents of Vect, which shuts down your opponent's stratagems. This is a game-winning top-tier level stratagem which almost every Craft World or Dark Eldar or even Harlequin army wants to at least ally into their own list. To unlock this, you just need a detachment of Blackheart stuff. So what you put in that detachment would mostly consist of 3 Ravagers with Disintegrators and an Archon. This is a very popular spearhead formation put into many competitive lists. Ravagers are awesome vehicles, pumping out 9 shots for 36 inches. You give them Disintegrators. Strength 5, -3, AP 3, and 2 damage. So these units are obviously very good, along with Venoms, which are amazing transports. You get them 2 Splinter Cannons for 75 points. They're naturally -1 to hit, and all these vehicles have a 5-up invul. You can take them as transports, so you can pretty much take as many as you want, as long as you have other units to go along with them. And they just zoom around the board. They're incredibly fast, shooting tons of firepower. Finally, that brings us to Raiders, which is the other transport option Dark Eldar have. They also will probably take a Disintegrator as opposed to a Dark Lance. Usually, higher volume of shots is better than 1 powerful shot, just generally speaking within 40k. And the bonus to the Raider is that it can transport 10 models as to a Venom, which only gets 5. All 3 of these are really powerful in 40k, along with you're going to want an Archon or 2 to unlock your HQs to allow your battalion or your spearhead to exist. They're not bad because they also give you an aura for reroll 1s. The Cabal of the Blackheart also has a really good relic called Writ of the Living Muse, which is a reroll 1s to wound aura. Awesome when you combine it with a natural reroll 1s to hit aura of an Archon. So you're rerolling all your hits and wounds of 1. Your basic troops are warriors. They're nothing spectacular. They're 6 points each, which is fairly cheap, and they're not bad. They have poison weapons and they shoot rapid fire. You put them in your Venoms or your Raiders and you just go to town. You probably take as few as you can of these and go from there. The Witch Cult is the next Dark Eldar cult. The only real competitive option here is Cursed Blade. That's the one that gives you +1 strength and pseudo-fearless for your witches. Basically, they're not fearless, but when they flee, only a maximum of 1 model will flee. Witches have a really interesting rule called combat drugs. Basically, how this works is each unit can choose to take 1 combat drug from a list of 6, and each unit must choose a different one until all 6 have been taken. Once you've taken all 6, though, you can keep taking the same one over and over and over again. So what I like to do is take multiple squads of witches and succubuses in my witch cult detachment. Let's say I take 3 succubuses, 2 units of 5 witches to go in my Venoms to zoop around and do annoying things, and then 4 or 5 big units of 9 to 10 witches in Raiders. This is a really powerful combo because backed by shooting supportive Ravagers, you now have a lot of Disintegrators, a lot of Venom shots, and the Raiders all have Disintegrators as well. That's like upwards of 14, 15 Disintegrators for 45 shots at Strength 5, AP 3, and 2 damage each, along with Venoms for poison. When your opponent needs to come into you, you can then countercharge him with all these witches. So taking that spread of witches I just mentioned, the 3 succubuses, 2 units of 5, and 4 units of 10, you're going to end up being able to put all the less useful drugs on your succubuses and your 2 units of 5 witches, so your big units of 10 can focus on really killing the other guy, each one taking +1 attack or +1 strength, matchup depending. So finally, that brings us to the Coven Detachment. And this is the only real staying power to the Dark Eldar army. This is where they're really tough and they hit really hard. The only thing is Dark Eldar are traditionally a very fast army. Both the Witches and the Cabals are very quick units that can move around the table very flimsily, or very wistfully. The Grotesques and Talos, however, are very slow in comparison. Grotesques have toughness 6, 4 wounds, and a 4-up invul. If you take Prophets of Flesh, you're pretty much always going to want to take Prophets of Flesh for these guys. That's just a base 4-up invul instead of the natural 5 that they come with. Talos, on the other hand, move 8 inches instead of 7 for the Grotesques. have toughness 7 instead of 6, a 3-up armor save to accompany their 4-up invulnerable save, and more attacks per model. Grotesques are 35 points apiece, while Talos are up around 100, but they have a little gun. Point for point, Grotesques are better on the wound scale, points per wound, but Talos have fly, which is a really amazing rule, and they have an armor save, which can be very helpful against enemy units that remove your invulnerable saves, things like Death Hex from Magnus or Null Zone from Space Marines. Grotesques have the ability to use an alternative weapon option to do mortal wounds in close combat, whereas a Talos has the option to fire haywire guns. Both of them are incredibly effective, and you honestly probably want to run both in your competitive Drukhari list, but each of them has their own merits, strengths, and weaknesses. To accompany them, you have Rax as your mainstay troop choice. These are not bad. They are a very fine troop choice. Again, if you make them Prophets of Flesh, they'll have a 4-up invulnerable save, which makes them incredibly durable. And their toughness 5 base if they're near a Homunculus. Really good troop choice there, and they have an awesome stratagem if you're Prophets of Flesh, that's the go-to choice for these guys, which is basically the ability to take a unit that's been damaged over the course of the game. Let's say you started out at 10 guys and they got knocked down to 2 by just getting shot over and over. You can spend 2 command points to replenish that unit back at full strength, all 10 guys, anywhere you want on the table within 6 inches of a board edge and 9 inches away from the enemy. This is awesome later in the game because it lets you take a wounded squad that you were holding in your backfield, teleport it to your opponent's backfield, full strength, and that can be a real menace for him in the later turns of the game, especially if he's left his backfield unprotected. So that brings us to Homunculus and Urian, which are the 2 HQs that Prophets of Flesh have access to. You probably want to take one of each in your competitive battalion, and why you want to do that is because the Homunculus is your basic guy. He goes +1 toughness as his aura ability, which is amazing for an army that wants to be as durable as the Covens. And he also has access to the Vexator Mask. Again, that's a Prophets of Flesh relic. So what it does is it lets you select an enemy unit within 6 inches of him at the start of the fight phase, and that unit fights last. That will work even if the enemy's charged you. So if the enemy has a really powerful close combat unit of their own, they're charging into your Grotesques to try to kill them, you can now make them fight last and then destroy that unit before it gets to attack. This is an amazing tool for a close combat army and really makes them work. Urian, on the other hand, has 2 other aura abilities in addition to his toughness buff, which make him almost an auto-include for a Prophets of Flesh detachment. He not only gives +1 toughness, but also gives +1 strength, making your Grotesques from strength 5 to strength 6, so they'll wound basic infantry like guardsmen and things like that on 2s, and tougher elite units like Custodes on 3s and 4s. He'll also bump your Talos up to strength 7, so they can start wounding tanks on 4s, which is an amazing buff. And he has +1 leadership. Now, +1 leadership is often viewed as a not too consequential thing, but in your larger units of Grotesques, when you have 7 or 8 guys and you lose 3 or 4 in one turn because your enemy focus fired, you don't want to lose another 2 to a bad morale check. Having that +1 leadership could save you 4 wounds worth of Grotesques, and that's a huge amount of staying power. So these are the best units in Drukhari Army. Really, you want to combine them all together, using the shard nets from witches to keep enemies locked in close combat, the staying power of the Grotesques and Talos from Prophets of Flesh to create a really strong core, and the fire support and mobility of your Cabal the Blackhearts to unlock Vec to shut down your opponent's stratagems, provide fire support, and move to other objectives. When you combine all these together, you get one incredibly powerful army. So those are the best units for Drukhari and Warhammer 40,000.